Welcome to the Job Podcast. This show is all about interviewing real people with real careers and real stories to tell. Today we spoke to Peter. Peter is a high school teacher with 23 years of experience out of New Jersey. We spoke about pay, education, his career path, and his experiences. If you're interested in becoming a teacher or if you just want to learn more about other people's real stories, I hope you enjoy the rest of the show. So, Peter, thank you for coming on. Why don't you tell everyone a little bit about your career, how you got into your career, and kind of the path that took you to being a high school teacher?
Sure. Again, Adam, thanks so much for having me on. So, this is my 23rd year as a teacher. This is my second career. I'm sure throughout your podcast, you've probably covered the concept that, most Americans have four careers in their lives. As a journalist at that time, this was 2002, married about 18 months. It was pretty much like continue to grind it out and maybe be able to afford, to kick in for groceries once a month or move to uproot my wife and our dog and, move to a major metropolitan city and start from scratch, having already been an award-winning journalist. So I had a lot of opportunities when looking to get into teaching, particularly in the area that I covered. A lot of people that I knew. I wound up choosing the town that I grew up in. Ironically, I never set foot in any of those schools. I'm completely privately educated, all the way through high school and college. So, just coming at it from a little bit of an outsider's view with that, teaching was not something that was ever really on my radar. I never considered it. And probably because of, I didn't know particulars about how my teachers in private school had been compensated or anything like that. I think back now at the hard time we gave them and,
For sure.
like all students will for their teachers, not realizing what they give to the profession, what they give to the relationships with their students. I feel ashamed of it now, given, how hard they worked and what they were able to do for me that now I can do for students.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think so. It sounds like journalism was kind of the passion originally for you.
Yeah.
And then
Yes,
looking for more of a sustainable career with the knowledge you had, teaching kind of just makes sense as something to fall into.
absolutely. You got
Yeah,
to pay the bills,
for sure.
and you can always write from anywhere. And that's never been more true than now. I did really struggle with the decision of leaving journalism full time. The professors that I had, it was almost like a monastic type of calling with that, like, and you're going to leave that. And, it finally clicked in me. Well, I'm going to do for others what they did for me. And that,
Awesome.
I didn't seek out their counsel on it or whatever. I just felt like, all right, transitioning from that. And like I said, I've stayed in it, from the perspective of continuing to write. Podcasting hadn't really come along yet, and I got pulled into that, and continue to maintain those skills, and then teaching journalism, teaching the next generation of journalists, and doing that and modeling that all the time.
Yeah. So let me ask you, when you left journalism and decided to go back into teaching, obviously you have the knowledge of the subject that you're going to teach, but is there a process that you have to go through to learn how do I give this knowledge to other people, people that are looking to learn about it? Is there like a school? Do you go through a course back to college? What does the education kind of steps look like before you get actually into a classroom teaching people?
Yeah, so I'm what's known as an alternate route certified teacher. There's still a teaching shortage. There was a teaching shortage at the time when I entered the profession in 2002. So what happened after I got hired, my supervisor at the time, she's like, "Yeah, they'll start these classes. You're going to do 200 hours. It's essentially night school through that first year, and ultimately you'll get your full teaching certificate." I had to pass what's called the praxis in my subject matter before I was hired. Did that. There was this like arcane in the county that I live in is different from the county that I teach in. They're right on the border of one another. There was this arcane like what was it? Like health and hygiene thing that was the final thing holding me up, that I could only schedule on a certain day, and went, and I never got a result from it. And that was a strange boondoggle. But I was on the Board of Education minutes and hired. So suddenly I'm, you know, cramming for my first classes and everything. And my supervisor was, just so supportive. And I had a wonderful mentor. But the education part of it, not having a degree in education, having a degree just in the subject matter, never having student taught or anything like that. So you're going to do this alternate route program. And it was for the first time run through a local university, 200 hours, 3 phases. Okay. And they were letter of the law. We did every minute of 200 hours at night. So I'm teaching all day, and then twice a week I'm driving 40 minutes each way to go to these, and there till like 10 o'clock at night, and coming home and then turning it around and teaching on top of the preparation and the assessment and everything else. And it was grueling. It was a test, and fault of the program too, you're in there with K to 12 people. I teach primarily ninth grade, have for the bulk of my career. And we're doing lessons, and there's a guy who's teaching math to fourth graders in the inner city, and I got to sit through his
Yeah.
lesson. And
Okay.
like watching a comedian die on stage, it
Yeah.
just doesn't have it. But to go through, and I had my provisional certificate when you pass the test and you get hired, and you got to go through those 200 hours to get the final certificate. So I
Okay.
did that, and yeah, that's the
That's how you
degree
learned. Yeah.
of education, that and experience. And the experience is, as we all know, the greatest teacher.
Yeah, so on the experience side of it, was there a lot of how much class time did you actually get? Because I know you said you were teaching there. Was
Mhm.
that how do you get your like what was your first day, if you remember, while you were still learning actually in a school? Were you like shadowing another teacher? Were
No,
you learning, or they're just like, here's the
boom.
class?
Here's you're teaching this class.
Really?
You're teaching freshman English. I did have an in-class support teacher, a special ed teacher with me, who I've taught with for many, many years. This is my 23rd year. This is her 28th year. We've taught together the most. We're not together this year, and she keeps needling me. You got rid of me and everything like that. She's never missed a day of school in 28 years, and we don't know her exact age, but we're pretty sure she's an octogenarian. This is her second career, and she is beloved. We're both diminutive. We're probably the smallest, height combination team ever
Okay.
in the history of the profession. But she's a powerhouse, and thank God for her. So my very first class with her, we had two African American boys who I am literally like 10 minutes into my teaching career, who decide to get into an argument and stand up and are about to come to blows over who is more black. And I'm literally in between them to
Yeah.
try to do that. So
Yeah.
baptism
The
by fire.
baptism by fire, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And one was an overprivileged kid, was the first kid in the school that owned an iPod, and the other was a lovable, gentle giant. And have run into him many years later, and always think of him fondly. And yeah, just thrown right into it. And like I said, my supervisor was like, "Oh, you'll do this over the course of the year." We thought it was going to start in October, and then boom, like I think I had back to school night, and I think it was either the day before back to school night or the day after back to school night that I'm starting that. So
You're
it
in
was
there.
like
Yeah, you're teaching.
very little warning,
Wow.
and like thrown at it. And all right, so rather than have to go back to school for that, to do that through the other county and the university and everything like that, that's fine. But like I said, if you might have joined up the levels a little, like secondary, primary, that kind of thing, it just felt kind of silly and redundant. And some of the things we've never ever used, and some of the stuff I fall back on all the time. We had to write a
For sure.
philosophy of education and things like that.
Yeah. How would you say if someone's looking to become a teacher, if they think they want to get into the career field, but they're not sure exactly what age they want to teach. You know, if they want to go young or if they'd rather go high school, maybe even into college. What was your kind of thought pattern like when you were deciding, hey, this is kind of where I want to work, this is the age I want to deal with? Or do you even have that choice? Or do they just kind of tell you, hey, you're starting with, ninth grade and then next year it's, you're down lower? How much control do you have over that? And how did you choose where you wanted to be?
Well, always saw myself as secondary as a high school teacher, the lack of autonomy with little kids, and taking kids to the bathroom and stuff like that. And again, God bless those people, like far more patient than I with that. I believe my certificate's 6 to 12. I think that's pretty much
Okay.
standard, and I've only ever taught, 9 to 12. So there's that aspect of it. As far as like realizing what you want to do, like I said, teaching was very much the last thing ever on my radar. In fact, at the newspaper that I worked at, occasionally they'd have tours come through, like the Cub Scouts come through to see what a working newspaper looks like. And once in a while, oh hey, can you give a tour for us? Would do, sure, no problem, not busy right now, no problem doing that. And a lot of people would say, like, you're really good at this, like you should consider teaching. Like, nah, no thanks. Like, not the passion for it, what have you. And then, you see as things, I mean, didn't know it at the time, but, thank goodness getting out of journalism when I did. And unfortunately, what's become of the profession. And I don't know what it would be like to still be doing it now. Certainly have the passion for it, but the jobs are just, different and not there. It's not as if teaching hasn't changed. It certainly has. Um, but just the sustainability of that and the living wage and, what I can offer as a journalist, as a teacher with my education and doing that. Like I said before, it literally was a difference of, being able to afford to live,
To
to
help pay.
change professions, and, that they honored my master's degree in teaching, whereas they didn't pay me for that in journalism. And my master's is in journalism from Columbia University. So to be able to do that, I would, if somebody was looking into becoming a teacher, well, what kind of experiences have they had with school age kids? What's gone well, what's not? I mean, certainly, again, what do you want to teach? I'm not going to teach journalism to, fifth graders. It's just not really a thing that's offered. And the idea of going back and teaching younger kids, and yeah, do they need a basis in English and everything like that? Yes, but I don't think I'd be a good fit with that. Being able to teach kids on that higher end of, the school experience and doing that and getting them ready. And what I really take a lot of pride throughout my career is, the kids that we've had come through and the successes that they had and what they've gone on to and everything like that. But, so I was like a camp counselor with kids, and I had experience with younger kids, and then for the most part, my experience of doing that was with about either 7 to maybe like 12-year-olds, and tended to like in the sweet spot there a little bit more. But like I said, having covered a lot of high school athletics, that was a pretty easy translation as far as that. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you really got into it and you were starting to get a little more comfortable and you had your own classroom set up and you were used to the actual teaching side of it, how much did you have to be involved, like on the financial side, with actually setting up the classroom, having, resources ready for the kids? I grew up coming through school in Scotland, and I know a couple teachers now that went to school with me, and when we talk about it, they're telling me that sometimes they're basically providing the majority of the resources that are in the class extra than just like basic paper and books and stuff for the kids to have. So how much would you say as a teacher you're financially responsible for making the classroom run?
So virtually none, at least in the high school experience. I mean, could I go into my pocket and do things, and have I at times? Yes, but that's a choice. It's not a reality of where I teach, and the district that I teach is fairly well to do. And you're provided with things. I'm also not like hey, I got to set up this in my classroom and this. I have the textbooks, I have the books, we have the technology, all that kind of stuff. All right, do I want to provide something extra for the kids that's above and beyond? That's a personal choice. I think it's more of a factor at the elementary levels, at the lower levels, and the extent to which they do that is, I don't know where they find the time. I marvel at what they do. It's just not me as a teacher. Like, my teaching style is what you see is what you get. And, we're going to do that through the involvement and, not like what's on a bulletin board or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I know you'd said you're not sure how they find the time. Can you speak to that a little bit and say, how often do you have to take your job home? I mean, how much of it is coming back to the house with you,
Every day,
grading, lesson planning, that kind of stuff? Is it like every day?
every day.
Yeah.
That's probably the greatest misconception about teachers, and you see memes about this, like, oh, you want to pay teachers what they're worth. Okay, well, here are all the hours, and if you're going to pay them again a living wage, you're going to be paying somebody, $250,000. We know that's not going to happen. So you've got to at times make hard decisions or prioritize, what you're going to do in terms of the amount of work. It's the preparation, it's the actual instruction, it's the assessment of what they do. There's the extracurriculars and anything else that you're going to do. I mean, I'm 49 years old. This will be the last summer of my fees, and this is going to be the first summer since 1989 I'm not going to have a summer job. I
Wow.
worked at a day camp for the last 15 years as a skateboard specialist and a tennis specialist. And I was in charge of, one particular age group of boys from, 7 to 9 years old for the last 13 years. The misconception that teachers only work a 10-month year and then we're on vacation. Like, I've never had that.
Yeah.
That's not the case. And I'm not living by any extent beyond my means here. We're comfortable. We're comfortable because I've done this for 23 years. My wife still works though, full time, and we both work hard. I do everything to instill that in my students, and everything that comes with that. You want the opportunities. Okay, well, what are you doing to go and get them, instead of the entitlement of, oh, I should be given this and you should give me that.
Yeah. So does the school, and probably the answer is no, but does the school provide you guys with any type of like assistance to find employment during the summer period? Like if you go to them and, a lot of people wouldn't survive, right, for 7, 8 weeks with no income. So is there any like programs? Do they try and put you guys somewhere like a summer camp, or are they just kind of like see you in 8 weeks, hopefully you're doing okay?
So getting into teaching, and that first year you're on a contract for 10 months, and you're going to get hired back, you're on a tenure track, everything like that. When I was tenured, it was 3 years and a day. I think it's changed in the state of New Jersey now. I think it's 4 or 5, and I'm grandfathered in under a lot of those older rules. It was all right. What are you going to do for the summer? How are you going to pay for that? How are you going to take care of things? And at that time, they had a paint crew within the school district, and all right, hey, they take teachers. They would also take former students who would go on that. So about 7 of us applied, and then they needed a foreman. And, I was the first person who would apply, and all right, I'll be the foreman. I'll be in charge of what we're doing. And we had 8 weeks. It was a pretty good gig. Did that for 7 years, and then it was 2009. We went through a pretty bad round of cuts a couple years after the Great Recession, and I lost that, and I was also the school superintendent's newsletter writer. Put that together for him. That was another thing I did, and with 2 flicks of an administrator's wrist, an administrator who would later be arrested for conducting a investigation rather than turning things over to the police into a potential molestation case.
Wow.
I lost $10,000 while that person, again, not making good choices. So I had to find something else. And I had done summer camp stuff while I was in college. Looked around, actually applied again at that camp, didn't need anybody. and interviewed at another camp that ultimately I would work at. They wanted to hire me for the age group that I'm with all year round, and there were like trips involved, and I was like, it's probably not a fit. And then very, very close to the summer, they suddenly needed a tennis instructor. I don't really play tennis. I still don't, but they needed it, and I went on a crash course on it. And what was really encouraging was that they're telling me, halfway through the summer, how you're the best tennis specialist we've ever had. I'm like,
Wow.
cool,
Maybe you're just naturally gifted. Yeah.
just instruct the kids and build the lesson into it and everything like that. Got to be outdoors. It's hot at this time. First day tennis court, pretty sure I came home with heat stroke. Couldn't get cold for like 3 hours, but did that for 15 years at that particular camp, and had a blast with them. But I was logging like 20,000 steps a day for
Okay.
39 days of summer. Like there's a lifespan to that, as much as I love that.
Yeah.
But same thing there, like with the counselors that would work beneath me when I was in more of a leadership role there for the final 13 years, and they kept throwing me more responsibilities. That's what I loved. That was the best part of that job, was the young people I worked with and mentoring them, and really kind of coming from the perspective. One of the nicest compliments ever paid to me as the foreman of the summer paint crew was, it was from another teacher who worked under me there, but he said that, the people we work for could learn a lot from the way you manage us. And I thought that was really kind of him to say, and just look at it from the perspective. And I guess I always have, that, all right, what I'm going to ask of you, it's not something I would ever not ask of myself, and throw myself into that. With that, I try to think of my classroom in the same way. Yes, we're not on the same level. I've got a little bit more education. That's why I'm in the front. The joke in journalism when I was coming through my education was, my professors would say, I had a couple of Pulitzer Prize winning professors, just the wealth of my education, to embrace being the stupidest person in the room, right? As a journalist, you've got to learn from others and know what they know, and then report it to others. So in effect, it's a form of teaching, right? Like, I learn it, and then I got to teach you when I write my story. And it's flipped in education. You're the smartest person in the room. They're there because they're not as smart, and trying to get them to that.
For sure. Just to completely blow the myth out the water, because I know a lot of people still think teachers don't get 8 weeks paid vacation a year. Yeah.
There's no paid vacation, even on a holiday break, on a spring break. I'm on a 4-day Memorial Day. We just recaptured a snow day yesterday. Like, I did grading before I went to a baseball game last night. I'll do planning today. I still have a final observation in these last 3 weeks of school, that I was on a writing conference on Thursday, and I got an email, hey, can I come observe you? I'm like, unfortunately, I'm at a university today for a training. Yeah, so I guess it's going to be next week. Like, kind of them to reach out and do that. It's unannounced, that they're coming by to do that, but prepping for that, because I mean, listen, come in my room anytime you want and do that and observe me formally, informally, but this is going towards my yearly evaluation and everything like that. So, that's constantly in the back of my mind as I'm driving home from a ball game at 2:30 last night. I'm putting things mentally together in terms of that. So much of it is that. And really, the art of teaching is the improvisation. It is what's going to happen. You cannot predict what's coming into the class that day, in terms of what a kid is dealing with, what kids are dealing with, what other distractions are going on, what testing we're doing this week, that the times of the class are different and everything like that. We're in our third different type of schedule in my career now, that we just started this year. We moved to what's called a rotating drop. So students have 8 total periods. There's 3 before lunch, there's 3 after lunch. Everybody eats lunch at the same time, and if I'm not on a duty that day, we can have a club meeting or, meet with kids informally. My door is always open. There are kids who come in and eat with me, a couple days a week. And every day, one of those periods, so though it's 3 and 3, there's really 8 in the schedule. Each side of lunch, one drops off. So that's been a big learning curve as far as planning for that and then adjusting for that and everything like that. It's definitely not something I think I would have been able to adjust to without 22 years of experience prior to this year. And there wasn't a lot of training to get ready for that, instead of just, well, this is a schedule I'm moving to. We were on an alternating 84-minute block. So you met with 4 classes one day, you met with 4 classes the other day. So at most you would see kids, 3 times a week. And now I see them, upwards of 4 times a week. And it actually works out to the minute for the year of what you see with a student. So doing that and being able to adjust to that. But there's a lot that goes into that. And again, the improvisation of doing it. You know your subject matter. It's knowing your kids, your students, and what they're capable of. And I'm greedy as a teacher, man. I want more for you. I want to see you go to that next level.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I mean, just from talking to you, it sounds like there's so much that goes on that, I'm sure parents, the kids, like you said, when you're a kid and you're in school, there's always that relationship. There's teachers you like, there's teachers you don't like, there's teachers you probably felt like you learned a lot more in their classes compared to some other ones. So I mentioned that you said that you had some people coming in and kind of observing you, and if you have the schedule to get them in, then you can get them in, but you're obviously busy too. So if you do have like a brand new teacher, just decided to want to get into the career, either did it traditionally or non-traditionally like you, if you're ever observing them, is there anything you would recommend someone who just wants to be a teacher, either a certain type of skill set or just a good mentality for them to have, or any resources that you used, like any online training, any books particularly that you read, anything that they can spend some time with, or just any mindset they can have that maybe helped you overcome those initial nerves, or kind of the new teacher feeling?
So I really struggled early on, just mentally, like, how am I going to fill 40 minutes of class time? Because we went for 40 minutes and then later into the block of 84, and then now back to 56, because at least as it was told to us, attention spans and everything like that. Although I worry that they will now come through at a 56-minute clip, and then they're going to college and they're going to be longer and struggle to be able to hold it together for that time. But one of the things that, and I believe it was a district initiative, although it may have been more of like a state initiative, I had to conduct observations informally of other teachers, like, hey, can I come in your class and watch you? That kind of thing. Had to do a certain number, both in my department and outside of that. And then of all the districts that I could have chosen, I chose the one that I went to, not because it was my hometown, because again, I didn't go to any of those schools. I'm the oldest of 4 boys in my family, and I'm the only one that was all privately educated. The youngest on the other end, he went completely through that public school system. So total opposite ends of the spectrum. He's a pilot, actually. He's a captain for Spirit Airlines. Yeah. And he finished up right before I started teaching at that high school. So we didn't overlap. And, knowing that district, the coaches, many of whom are teachers, of all the ones that I looked at, that I had the opportunity to go to, it was because of those people. And, not as many are left after, 23 years almost completed here in my career, but just the impactful nature of that. My mentor that I was paired up, and my goodness, thank God I was, wonderful, soft-spoken, intelligent guy. He left the profession. He left the profession about 10 years ago. Just the number of changes that were made as far as how teachers are evaluated, and the minutia that were put through, that takes away from the meaningful stuff that gets in the way of that. And he did some like union work but he happened into an ice cream business, and he's really thoughtful about what he does, and he's done really, really well. And yeah, actually, it's funny, I work with a couple guys, three guys that, in addition to teaching, have gotten into the ice cream business.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I wonder
And
what
listen,
the link is there.
I don't know. It's just the luck, the way that it's worked out. One of the guys that I started with was much older. He left teaching, retired from teaching, and had happened into like produce, and is a millionaire with a produce business and stuff like that. But yeah, just the exposure that I had to the great educators that I work with, again, molded me. I had wonderful, wonderful teachers coming up. I don't know that I've ever really like thought about, all right, today I'm going to be Miss Spanarkle. Today I'm going to be Mrs. Lenhart. But, to the way in which they taught me, the things they taught me that I fall back on all the time. I teach English, but I broke out some science the other day, and the kids were like, science? I'm like, yeah, I went through classes like you did, guys.
Yeah,
I know what mitochondria are. Like,
that's awesome.
you,
Yeah.
you know, and doing that, and they seemed really kind of surprised. I was a little surprised to the level that they were
Yeah. Yeah,
surprised.
you're just an English guy. Yeah, you need to realize that you're a person too. Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, it sounds like just surrounding yourself with good role models, and that kind of was something I wanted to talk about. Kind of the relationship between teachers inside of schools. I know obviously on top of just the students being there, you guys are just people too, right? So I'm sure, there's relationships there between teachers. There's probably some teachers that are easier to work with, some teachers that you have your own opinions about. And kind of branching off that, do you think there's enough, um, kind of, there is enough, I'm trying to think of the right word, not oversight, but involvement with just making sure that the topics that are being taught to kids are, up to standard, up to the newest ways to do it? Because I can imagine if someone's been teaching, like you said, 30, 40, 45 years, if you've been teaching a certain way for a long time and something changes, are they being trained on the new ways to teach things that are maybe found to be more effective, or different learning styles? Or, especially a big one I'm sure is changes in how we understand mental health, right? Like, people with autism, learning disabilities, ADHD, things like that. Is there a lot of ongoing training that's available to help teachers as well?
Yes. Yeah. So in the state of New Jersey, we're required to do a minimum of 20 hours a year of professional development, but we often vastly exceed that, and all sorts of district initiatives and everything like that. So the simple answer is yes. And on top of the field, you mentioned 20, 30 years. I teach with a teacher. This is his 50-50 year in education.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just, again, the wealth of knowledge and experience that somebody like that is capable of bringing to a classroom. That that transcends anything you can ever compensate that professional with. What they can give to a student, what they can teach them. Just the ability to stand before them and challenge them in that way, and make them to aspire to be better people, the individuals. The cliche is that teachers, we affect infinity, right? That what we do, they're going to take with them forever. And so much of it goes unspoken. But like I said, that I can think back to teachers and the things they provided me that, I've done with students in my classrooms through the years. Yeah, but there's a lot of training. We'll have meetings several afternoons a month, and then there's, professional days and everything like that. And then on top of that, what I would seek out, what individual teachers would seek out to do, like that conference that myself and two other English teachers went to the other day. Like that was our volunteering to do, hey, want to go do this, and the district pays for it. We had to drive ourselves down there, not compensated for that. It's a little bit of a different discussion, and some of the rules have changed when it comes to that. But seeking out that opportunity, and to bring, I'm going to turn around next week and deploy some of those strategies already, and be able to do that.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
really coming along, it's a buffet. if you will. You pick what works, what you want to try. And, it's nothing tried and true. And what might work with one group might not work with another set. And being able to recognize that, you put so much time into planning a lesson, it falls flat. You put not as much and it really hits and
Okay.
everything
Yeah.
like that. And then being able to adjust. But at the end of the day, there's 24 hours and only 7 days in a week. And how much can you do?
Mhm.
And meeting all the deadlines and everything like that.
Yeah. So yeah, it sounds like it's just continuous learning for you guys as well as the students too. And you'd mentioned earlier about attention spans and kind of how they've been changing. So I think a great topic to talk about is recently, the last 10 years, I feel like there's a lot of cameras that have been in classrooms that maybe haven't been seen before, social media wise. Like we're seeing a lot of students recording videos, interactions between students and teachers, and sometimes they're great. There's a lot of positive, sometimes there's negative, but it seems like a lot of the time some of the conversations that these teachers are having sound almost more like a parent would have with their kid. Maybe that there's some behavioral issues going on there and the teacher is almost stepping into that paternal role and kind of trying to guide the student there. So can you speak on if you've ever experienced that kind of relationship, or how maybe teachers do fall into more of a paternal kind of, you really want to genuinely help this person, in their life, and how you kind of balance that boundary between also maintaining your professional responsibilities as well.
Sure. I mean, it's not an original thought of mine, but just the idea that on average, we see our students more than their parents will see them each day and each week. So the ability to influence them when it comes to that. And then as far as, I mean, we'll do it when I've taught like a dystopian literature unit, and last year in particular, some of the works focusing on like surveillance. Okay, hey, let's count how many cameras there are in the room right now, and just they'd be shocked to the level of, all right, everybody's phone, everybody's Chromebook. Okay. All right. So it's a video phone in the room, but it's not actively working, things like that. And how that's changed so much in my time in education and all that. I do think that a lot of what you tend to see positively and negatively in terms of what's recorded in an environment tends to be more performative than actual, than unscripted or anything like that set up. I think that's just the way the cookie crumbles.
Yeah.
But, in terms of every day being with them and those interactions and the things you can't predict too, I have a real sense that, the things find you when they need to. 2 years ago, back to school night, not having a good day, going back to school to do that. You got to put on the face for the parents and everything like that. Not really feeling it. It's my birthday. I get a out of the blue message from Facebook from a former student that I even had to really struggle to recall the student, but it was like, how are you? Hey, I just want to say to you, you had when I was in your class, my sister and I were both going through a hard time, and you asked us how we were. And that always made an impression and is stuck with me. And I want you to know, like, my sister's cleaned up her act and she's going on to this, and I'm doing this. And we're both just so grateful. And like, I needed that. I needed that before I went in and talked to these parents about making a difference with their kids when I wasn't really feeling it. Teachers aren't regarded as people, they're regarded as machines, like turn it on, turn it off. And that's not the way it works, and particularly as I aged in this profession, the ability to know, like almost like a baseball pitcher, I can't throw 100 miles per hour 100 times a day. I need to know, I have to figure out, all right, I need to throw one at 100 miles per hour right now, and then I'm going to go back to 70 miles per hour, and I'm going to change speeds, and I'm going to adapt my approach. And that's just the wisdom of doing this. My dear mentor, who just was a phenomenal teacher and is an even greater person, he joked with me early on. He said, "You're the only marathon runner I know who sprints in this profession. That you go full for all the time, he says to me. And, he's always made me think about that. And like I said, what you see is what you get with me and my work ethic. But to preserve yourself, you've got to make hard choices in terms of doing that. So you're there for your kids. Knock wood. I have a really, really good attendance record and a lot of sick days saved up
I bet.
that, I'll be capped at the end of my career with. And like I said, I work with a woman who has never taken a day off.
How many sick days do you think she has saved up after that career?
So if she's getting 10 a year, she's at least 280, if not a little bit more, maybe like 300, but she'll be capped at whatever arbitrary number the state puts it
Deemed
at.
possible, yeah.
That, yeah, she won't be able to take so many. And she's not like she's going to say, all right, well, now if the kids asked her, we had a custodian retire last year or two and did like a walkout end of the day, like everybody's high-fiving, and some of the kids in the class were like, oh, hey, when are you retiring, they asked
Yeah.
her. And I'm not.
Yeah. That's good.
It's one of my biggest fears is I'm going to get to school one day and hear, oh, she's taking a day. Oh, all right, good for her. Well, no, she's not going to be here again ever. I worry about that.
Yeah.
Because she
Yeah,
just
so there's really like genuine relationships there between teachers as well, and I'm sure when you guys work with each other for a long time, those are friends, right, that you're working with. Is there a lot of like do you spend a lot of time with teachers outside of school, like in your friend group as well, or do you kind of try and
yeah.
separate work from your personal life?
So went to a ball game last night, and the two guys I went with are teachers, but not in my district. Both of them I met through the summer camp that I worked at, and one's my podcast partner. My dad actually delivered him, found that out later on, brought him into the
Wow.
world.
Small
Same
world.
way he did my wife, brought my wife into the world.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And then the other one was he worked under me as a counselor and then moved up to what I did at the summer camp. We were on the same level, and he has gotten into education. Just wonderful, hardworking, good natured. Uh, but we don't work in the same district, but they happen to be teachers. You tend to run more with academics like that. I didn't have any teachers in my family, um, but the wonderful people in my department, in my school, that I'm just so fortunate to also call friends, and what I've learned from them and what they've been able to give me in terms of their experience and their knowledge and their wisdom and everything like that. Just super, super grateful. I made a really good choice of district with the people that were there. Like I said, it was very, very simple. I knew them, I knew what they were capable of, and getting to know all the other ones that have come in, since I was hired, other people and all that experience there.
Yeah, and you said something interesting. You said sometimes it feels like teachers are really not treated like people and more like machines. Now, that opinion, does that come more from dealing with parents, I would guess, and dealing with other people in the teaching world? Because, like I said, everywhere we look now, someone's on social media giving teaching advice, alternate forms of teaching. You don't know the background they have or whether that stuff's researched or if it's just opinionated. And a lot of that, I'm sure, translates up to parents. And then maybe they come to you on, parent teacher days with these type of opinions, these type of questions. So what has the relationship been like, especially more so since social media has came around? And there is such more of an access to information, and everyone has kind of got their own opinion on everything really these days. Have you seen that change? Is the relationship with parents different? How are you dealing with kind of uh, getting your point across and showing that, hey, I really know what I'm talking about because this is my career?
I think in terms of the education and the background that I have, I think people give me a great degree of faith with what I can provide. Like, there's a lot of other things I could go and do, and I choose to teach. And, so getting the credit from them there. That being said, sometimes, like any other profession, people are going to push back. The difference is our product is people. We're not making widgets. We're not making microchips or anything like that. We're making living, breathing individuals, and the experience that goes into that. And it's like anything else in our world today. People they want immediate gratification, anything like that, or okay, somebody's going to email and like, what are you doing for my kid with this or whatever? Is it a squeaky wheel gets the grease in or whatever? You deal with what comes across email or phone call or what have you. And I think I've been fairly fortunate when it comes to that. Everybody's got all sorts of different stories and whatever it might be. But like I said, as I try to present what I can offer your kids, I still don't think of myself as a teacher 23 years in. I think of myself as a writer who teaches. And I'll tell the kids and I'll tell the parents on back to school night, when I wind up seeing the most of them for the year, there's not two or three other teachers in this building who have written the amount that I've written. If you added them together, what I can give them the most is in terms of the experience with their writing and the knowledge there. And I think they trust me with that, and my background and my accomplishments reflect that. So, there's not been a lot of, pushback or anything there. And the other thing that gets me out of bed in the morning and gets me into the building is that, again, not looking at myself as a teacher, as somebody who every day my job is to help get their children, my students, one step closer to their dreams. Super, super fortunate. One of my beloved former students, she wound up working for my favorite baseball team for the New York Mets, and go up to a game and surprised to be able to throw out the ceremonial first pitch on the field before the game.
Wow.
Like, it's an
Yeah.
absolute dream come true. And it had been my mentality even before that, the idea of helping students achieve their dreams. That's something I could only ever have dreamt about. And it was so funny. Like a couple days earlier, I was in another city at a ball game, and somebody was throwing out the first pitch, and the party that they were with was behind us. And I was like, that'd be really cool to do someday, And 4 days later, I'm actually doing it.
You're out there, yeah. You're on the
You
pitch.
just think it and put it out into the world, and then it happened. But it happened because of, a dear young woman who came through my classroom that I think saw who I am and what I attempted to give to her and do that, and that she would think that just
Think
the
of you.
thought,
Yeah.
let alone making that
Yep.
happen. Like,
Absolutely.
and listen, if that's a gratification that she did that for me. She knows that I love that, but that doesn't happen if I'm not in this profession. And it's just one example, But what I try to instill in those parents on back to school night through that story is like, okay, I want the same thing you want, but I don't want it in an immediate gratification sense. I want to see the long term, just like you do. The thing, we talk AI and we talk all these other things. The thing that doesn't get thought of enough in schools, in society, is critical thinking. And my greatest fear is that I'm going to have kids who are going to be taking care of their parents or not sure what to do with their parents, and they're going to ask AI, chat GPT, should we pull mom's plug or should we keep her plugged in? Like big decisions like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
They've got to thoughtfully move through that. And I think the parents need to understand they want the individual to experience things so that they can take care of them later on, instead of the cliche of they're going to live in their parents' basements or what have you.
No, 100%. And I think it's a huge thing to think about, just with how the way that young people process information is changing, with ChatGPT, with shorts, Facebook Reels, whatever they're trying to do. And with the fact that the attention span, like you had mentioned earlier, has gone from maybe being able to sit at a younger age and have a whole conversation or read a book, to 10, 15 seconds of just information that they're taking consistently. And do you see, like, is there a concern among the teaching space? And I'm sure there's a lot of communication between different, teaching groups and different unions and things like that, of the change that may have to come with how teachers get information across because of the way that, there's 2, 3, 4 year olds now that by the time they can literally set up, they're looking at a tablet and they're looking at 10-second shorts and information. Do you think that might have any effect in the future with how teachers actually teach?
It already does. It already does. That we have gone to a schedule this year that is fewer minutes each day as a result of dwindling attention spans and their inability to, hold it together for so long. It already has. And then how education sometimes has to fit that mold of what they're used to consuming. But we have all that data already to suggest that it's changed pathways in the brain and how we're doing that. And it's not just in terms of the education, it's in terms of everything in our society and being able to go through and to think thoughtfully about that. And I think we've already seen, there are homes that set hard limits, there are homes that don't, that it's placation or whatever. Here, go look at the screen or what have you. And then, we don't have children, my wife and I, but, conscious of that stuff and seeing it with nieces and nephews and, again, the need to set some kind of limits and everything. Like these things are great and what they're all capable of and all that. It's awesome. And, the world has been so flattened in terms of social media and the opportunities and everything like that. But you've got to be smart about it. You've got to make good decisions. And, so often there's the things that come up as a result of that that maybe somebody didn't anticipate or, they're not thinking through. So you got to look at it from that. But we've already seen the results of it. And, so often our decisions are made with that in mind. And I think we're only going to get more of it. A big factor in our decision to go to this schedule this year. And then one of the things we did with that was as a district, as a school, the collecting of phones and doing everything there. And the kids who have had them longer, they're more resistant. The kids that have come in that I teach primarily freshmen, like they've been great about it.
Okay.
They still, I joke with them. It's like the fish coming to the top of the aquarium at feeding time at the end of the period.
I
They're
bet.
coming over and, okay, like, all right, stretching it out and everything. And the way we currently allow it is that, it's taken. That's the policy. It's supposed to be taken. Sometimes more than others, not, what have you. And then they're allowed to have it going to the next class, and then they're allowed to have it at lunch.
Okay.
And there's kids that are good about it. There's kids that are not. So often it's my mom texted me like, all right, well, cool. Let me tell her right now that, God, Jesus, me, whoever, I don't care who's texting you. Like, it's not happening. And if they don't understand that, we can make it abundantly clear to them, about I got to step out, after school or whatever. Like, well, we're not doing that right now. Got to be firm about it, be fair about it. I'll tell them all the time, I have my phone in my pocket and, unless it's an extreme emergency, you're not going to be seeing me use that.
Using it. Yeah, absolutely.
The same we expect of them, but setting that boundary, the state of New Jersey, though, and so many of these states, so New York has gone to a full thing. You said you're in Florida, right? Like what they've done on campuses and, the state of New Jersey has allocated a whole $3 million for next year school year. I don't know what they're going to do with that, whether every district's going to get a pouch for a kid or whatever. What was great about the policy we went to, all right, it's got to be collected. You put them in these, they have like these calculator pouches or whatever. I get a copier box and I come around as I tell the parents, like, I got to have the awkward, eye contact as
Give me
they
the
put the
phone.
phone in
Yeah.
there. Like, you
Yeah.
don't bring it with you, cool, like it's in your locker or what have you. But if there's a magic trick and suddenly it appears in class, we're going to have a problem because you've lied to me and everything like that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I didn't know that that was actually something that was being done, taking phones off kids. But it must be a bit of a, it's a double-edged sword because there was a period where when computers and laptops and iPads started coming into classrooms, I guess as a teacher, it probably allows you to give a more interactive, a more, thorough experience for the children, because they can get actual hands-on. I mean, I know I've graduated high school in 2015.
Okay.
So when I left, we had a couple computers. I think Scotland's maybe a little behind as well of what we were doing. My high school was a reconditioned army barracks that we had. Yeah, like little individual buildings. So we were still old school blackboards, all of it for there pretty much. But yeah, technology is definitely a huge part. But I think part of the show and where I kind of wanted to get it to wrap up was a lot of people are going to listen who are sitting here saying, "Hey, where do I want to go? What I want my career to be?" They're going to listen to you talking about your experience teaching, and a huge part of that is just in this day and age, is it a career that I can afford to live my life, and I can afford to take time off if I need to, and maybe not have to work the whole summer or not have to save all year. I'm able to pay my bills and have a family. So would you say from what you've seen, I know you're in New Jersey, but what does the starting salary kind of look like for a new teacher coming in the door? And then how does that progress as time moves on?
So right now in my area, it's about $50,000, and I think for people right out of the gate, I don't know that that's necessarily sustainable. The teacher that I went to the ball game with, that he's in his second year, they gave him credit for a year he did of substitute teaching in another state last year. The idea that he's trying to save for a house, that he's saving for a future with his girlfriend, um, that he's working a summer job, that he was working on his day off yesterday before I picked him up to go to the game. I don't know that that's necessarily sustainable. Again, the amount of time we spend with young people and planning to be with them and assessing that and everything else. If you were to put a dollar figure to each of those hours, I think it's under minimum wage. And I get it, budgets are tight and everything like that. I understand that completely. But what we do with the people of the future, with, the generation that will take over, and how important that is. It's never been tougher, I think, to encourage people to get into this profession. I don't know that I'd encourage them to get into this profession. It's never been the dream job. It's not really the dream job. Like I said, always considering myself a writer, and I will always write, but it has afforded me, my wife, my family, the ability to be fairly comfortable. But like I said, I've worked year round to be able to do that. And you make tough choices in terms of what happened. Then a hot water heater breaks or something like that, what you're doing. I happened to see one of your earlier podcasts and talking about, so many people living paycheck to paycheck. I wouldn't say that we've ever really done that, but there's been times when it's been tough, and then cuts are made, and am I anywhere near that? Or a guy we went to the ball game with was stressing whether his district was going to make cuts because there were cuts with state funding and everything like that. If you like working with young people, the issue we're running into now, so I'm in tier 1 in New Jersey, so I can retire at 55 with a minimum of 25 years in. The people who have come after me as late as, I believe it's tier 5, like, they have to do more than 40 years and they'll be over 65.
Wow. Yeah.
I don't know. I definitely know that that would have not been my outlook at the beginning of this. Like, wow, I would work until I was 6. I got in at 26 because, again, it was my second career. The idea that, all right, I'm going to work for 40 years as a teacher and do that.
Yeah. It's daunting.
No, there's too many other things I want to do in my career, with my life, the things that being a journalist and being a teacher have unlocked, and getting into screenwriting, something I also never ever thought I'd get into, and having some success with that, and being encouraged by people in the industry, and to do that. So that's become the dream. And again, the idea that I can teach students that I can generate a class about the storytelling of video games and tap into, kids' interests with that. And like, all right, in a regular English class, this might not have been my cup of tea, but I'm going to do this through the lens of The Legend of Zelda. And this is something that really interests me, and have kids go on to, do computer programming and, work in the video game industry and things like that. just again, the way you influence that kind of stuff, and you try to make it timely, you try to make it interesting. We came through Teacher Appreciation Week like 2 weeks ago, and it's always kind of hit and miss that week. Like, oh, hey, they put a lunch out, cool, and then it's gone
Yeah. Yeah.
because you were on a duty or something like that and couldn't get to it, and that's not what it's about. Um, it's the idea, the things, the little notes you might get from kids. And I got an anonymous one, and it was to the effect that, well, Mr. Ketelaar, I've never had a teacher that I think does more to try to make class fun. And it's actually the last thing I think of when I prepare a lesson is fun. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And again, what time you're going to meet with kids, what's the makeup of the classroom, what's going on that day. There's just so many variables. But trying to think of it. My mentor, he coined the phrase, it's 5 shows a day. And
Yeah.
you get in there, and you're doing that. There's so many things we're asked to do. There's so many questions we're asked to answer. The number of times that your train of thought gets interrupted, and being able to adapt with that. In many ways, that's like journalism. It was like coming in every day and the dartboard spins and you throw the dart. What am I going to be an expert on today? Everything like that. It's just a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a couple things. If let's say right now you were able to make a couple changes that you think would bring more people back into teaching, what would be the changes that you would make?
More trust. People are not getting into this to do the wrong thing, but there's such a, I don't know, there's a guardrail in the sense of the amount of lesson plans and what they have to look like. Well, wait a minute. Who's the lesson plan for? It's for me, right? To know what I'm doing. The idea that I'm going to spend so much time filling in this idea of what a lesson plan should be. Okay. When we'll hear in other districts, like they're not even doing lesson plans, or that the state merely says evidence of plans must exist. Okay. So whether it's written on a post it or whether it's super hyper focused and, somebody worked on these for 3 hours outside of class on top of everything else they're doing, have the faith in us to do that. Okay. Especially given the experience that somebody has. Yes, with a younger teacher, back when I was handing in handwritten plans and then typewritten plans, and now everything's digital, but it's on a format that looks like it's a 1998 website. Just again, have the faith in me. I think my record reflects I know what I'm doing. You take that onus away from me and let me be able to affect the change. Let me be able to have the one-on-one conversations, that kind of stuff, instead of, so many things get added and the salary doesn't increase. So you've increased the number of tasks that I have to do, but you've not incentivized them. And I'm somebody that, amongst teachers, like I've never missed a deadline with lesson plans ever. But I never missed a deadline as a journalist. And, I take a lot of pride in that. And I try to instill that in my students. Like, okay, you have to answer the bell. You show up. You have to do these things. It matters. Okay. And it affects how people perceive you. And, that I'm going to show out for them, that they'll show out for me. And again, there's adjustment, they're not an adult with my level of experience and helping them to do that. But I think in terms of encouraging them and showing them that it can be done, but just be realistic in terms of what people have to do. And, I think my administration currently is very good when it comes to that, but I think in terms of the overall profession, there needs to be more trust. Nobody's getting into this to be rich. That's not the situation. We're getting in this. Everybody loves to see the light bulb go off. Everybody loves to see somebody get it and succeed. Okay. And the kids that you struggle with to do that when you make that breakthrough and everything else. And then there's all the ones you never hear about that you did, I mean, come on, it's a judgmental world. You walk in front of kids, they're instantly judging you, whether they're going to get along with you based on the shape of your face and everything else. but the tenderness that we can show them, the understanding, everything like that, and again, showing up and showing out for them.
Yeah. No, no, it's super powerful, man, to hear that, especially coming from someone with as much experience like you have. When you think about it, it's the fact that really a teachers, it's kind of the one consistent that everyone's going to have in their life. Everyone's going to go to school. Everyone's going to have those relationships. So I think a lot of people will take a lot of pride knowing that there is people out there like you who you can
Thank you.
tell that are invested in this, that really want the best for kids. They know for a fact that there's probably other career fields that you could have gone into where you would have made more money if you would have given the same commitment. But it's a selfish, it's a sacrifice that it's made. And at the end of the day, I'm sure when you get messages like you had said from, students 20 years ago, it probably makes it all worth it for you.
It does. It does. I mean, it's worth it being with the kids. Like I've explained to them, they're the best part of the job. And it's funny, you tell people you're a teacher, and I've told the kids this as well. Like oftentimes the first thing that comes out of other people's mouths is an apology. Like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Why? Why are you apologizing for them? They are the blank slate. They are the thing we get to mold, the thing we get to influence to the better, to do that. And that's a tremendous responsibility. It's not one I take lightly in the least, and really, really try to be thoughtful in terms of what we do, and considerate of them and of their time. More has never been asked of young people in human history. And then you layer on top social media, and then the demands of what they've got to do to move on to the next level of schooling and everything like that. It's just such a complicated equation, and I try to, as much as I can, make my classroom reflective of the world, but at the same time a little bit of a sanctuary, and some place where I'm going to be there for them. They know they can find me. Knock on wood, I'll be there for them. Anybody can come through my door. What do you need? How can I help you? Uh, how can we make your dreams come true? How can we do that together? I'm not going to do it for you. That's the thing I tell them all the time. We'll do a review for a test. Oh, what's the answer to what is this? Well, what is that? Let's talk about it. Let's help each other out. One of the evaluation models that we went through, that thankfully we've moved away from, all these theorists, her evaluation model, you couldn't get a 4 out of 4 unless students taught other students, because that's why we're in school, right? Do you see what that's getting rid of? Teachers. Okay, the kids are going to teach other kids. I forgot you have a master's degree in this subject and all these years of experience. Oh, and you did it professionally. No, you don't. Okay, so the very idea, thank goodness we moved away from that. And I don't know why anyone would ever do that. Kids teaching other kids? Really? Why?
Yeah,
What does that do?
that's crazy.
Not
Yeah.
encouraging other kids. That's different. Okay. Not assisting or, anything like that. No, literally the idea. Kid teaches other kid the lesson. That's a 4 out of 4. The teacher teaches the lesson. That's a 3 out of 4. What does that deprioritize? The
Yeah.
teacher.
It's like, why are you even there at that point, right? If you're not
Exactly.
teaching. Yeah.
Exactly. And what AI will do for the future of this profession or whatever. Listen, AI, great idea. Okay. And there are useful things about it, but it's amazing. Like, it doesn't write good lesson plans. Huh. Okay. You try to get it to grade things or evaluate it or whatever. It's not useful. And of course, kids will be lazy or try to get out of things and try to do that. And that's another level that we've got to prepare for, to try to DAI something that they're not going to be able to take a shortcut, anything like that. Just another thing you couldn't plan for, that now you have to anticipate.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Peter, like I said, I think it's people are really going to appreciate hearing it from you and hearing that there's still positivity there and there's still people who love what they do. So I'm sure people are going to want to hear more of what you have to say. Where are some good places that they can find you outside of talking with me here?
So I'm a podcaster of 14 years at this point. Our podcast group is called Fantastic Geek with a PH, and it's a pop culture podcast that I take so much of what I teach about and use those skills to talk about movies and TV and the Marvel universe, in the Star Wars universe, and the Star Trek universe. And that's just been another thing you couldn't anticipate. It's a couple guys who are full-time teachers who find one another. And my buddy was podcasting the TV show Lost at that point, was a big fan, and how much you bring from English and humanities into that show and everything like that. And then we're picking a show to do on our own and to put that out there. But just the idea that people in more than 100 countries want to tune in to listen to a couple guys talk about this, and every day wake up getting ready for school, social media, like when are you guys going to talk about this, when's this episode out, and everything like that. But it's the same skills that I used as a journalist that I use in my classroom. Okay, let's recap, let's analyze, let's theorize, let's go through this. Okay, let's respond to questions, things like that. What are the big ideas here? What are the themes? Everything, what let's predict all of that. So being able to do that, really, really fortunate. And I don't use my classroom to proselytize, hey, go listen to my podcast or anything. It's amazing. Kids will find out I use my name on there, and the way I treat and we treat the podcast, the idea that, students could be listening, administrators, parents could be listening. Nothing's going to be different. We have a rating and everything like that. Nothing I wouldn't do in my classroom, and evaluate the TV and the film and the offerings there, like we do in our classrooms with the subject matter, and to look at it that way and to structure it and everything like that. And, the podcast episodes of things that have come up in school, to do that with kids, like, all right, you're going to create a podcast of this, and be able to turnkey that for them, has become in vogue, and been invited into other classes to talk about our experience with that. We're going to the red carpet premiere of the 3rd season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds in a couple weeks. It's something that, growing up as a fan like crazy, that can go to that and get to cover it. And we're walking out of the pilot a couple years ago, and the stars are in the same screening with us, and turn to me and just, hey, thanks for coming, like, yeah,
Wow.
thanks for having us. But it's all as a result, it's all the stew of the experience that I've had, and being able to put that together. And, like, everybody will tell you, it's the preparation and the luck, and when they cross, and what you're able to do. And again, another thing to offer for the students in our classrooms to be able to do that.
Yeah, and like I said, I really appreciate you coming on. I think people are going to really enjoy listening to what you have to say. Check Peter out wherever he is. He's going to drop his links. I'll put them in the description as well. And Peter, really thank you for coming on, man. It's been a great conversation, and I think it's really insightful. And I hopefully it'll find some people, give them the information that they need to feel successful going into a teaching career.
Absolutely, Adam. Thank you so much.